Welcome to the second episode of a podcast-like series on my channel called Before the Ink Dries. Last week we talked about why do we artists create, and now we'll look at why do we not create anymore. So why do adults stop creating and why do they stop making art? Today I am joined with my little brother
I
who
know y'all missed me.
nobody missed you. He's an appreciator of art, but he doesn't really draw much himself. Before we jump to the topic, I think this will be a lengthy video as usual. Well, not usual, but for these types of series. So, to my artist friends out there, please feel free to take out a sketchbook and draw as you listen to this in the background or something. So, going back to the topic, let me ask my little brother here, why do you not create even though you enjoy art? I'm listening.
I would say I guess I'm not good at it compared to people like you or everybody else on YouTube.
I think that's a very common thing that we hear in terms of a lot of people as to why they don't draw. I know that, you need to realize that even me as an artist, I often think like, oh, this artist draws so much better than me. Like there's always going to be someone better than you, right?
But I mean, it shouldn't look like a toddler drew it.
But I think there's this misconception that art is a talent, but art can also be a skill. So do you know the difference between the two?
Yeah, but I would say if you're naturally talented at something, you tend to focus more on those skills, rather than a person who isn't born with it, they would rather focus on something that they're naturally gifted at.
True. I feel like this is going to be a podcast of me trying to convince you to just make art. Um, I do recognize that, but I think, um, yeah, I know that as a child, if you have a talent, you do kind of get a bit of a head start, that like you are encouraged more, and that kind of does keep you going. But at the same time, when you're a child, adults are almost required to say all your art pieces are good. So you're saying that like quote unquote drawing like a toddler is what kind of prevents you from wanting to create more. But why don't you like just doodle? Like doodle doesn't have to be a fully realistic piece.
I would say I don't know what to doodle, and if you're talking about, doodles on school sketchbooks or whatever, I just would rather pay attention to class rather than doodle.
Of course, you probably shouldn't doodle in class. Um, but I think what I mean more is that, like, let's say you're waiting for a game to load. Why can't you just draw a flower or a car on the corner of a piece of paper?
Because it's called an SSD, it takes like 5 seconds for a game to load.
You get my point. You get my point. Like when you have free time in between things, or like before you sleep, right? Just like 10 minutes coloring in a mandala. Like art doesn't have to be just full on sketches or drawings or paintings. It can also be like we're talking about creative expression, right? It can be writing, it can be poetry, it can be coloring in mandalas or coloring books, um, like any type of creative work.
I would say many people, including me, we're just lazy. We would rather do something we consider fun, whether it be playing games, watching TV, Netflix, eating food. That's just the main cause.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Um, like art in a sense does require time and
Patience.
patience. Yep, patience. But at the same time, I think good art is what kind of requires time and patience. If you're just a casual, like if you're not doing this professionally, there's no reason for somebody to be spending like 2 hours on an art piece, right? If you're doing this casually, not professionally, then it can just be like drawing a couple of lines in a sketchbook. The voice just went
Voice
goodbye.
crack. Well, I would say that, you get this great idea in your head, and when you try to apply it into paper, when you're not quote unquote great, then you just, like, when it doesn't look like what you envisioned, then it just kind of breaks your morale.
Yes, oh my God, I relate to that so much. It's like, okay, it's great that like this applies to whether you're an artist or not. Just the fact that you have this vision in your head and then you try to put it on paper and it doesn't work. It fails.
Most frustrating thing ever.
It sucks. But like, do you ever give up with games like that? Like one level you fail, do you just stop the game entirely?
I usually try maybe like two or three more times, and then yeah, I give up.
Okay. Not the answer I was hoping.
It's the truth. There was this mission in a game that I couldn't be like I tried 15 times in a row, just gave up for like 9 months, came back, became a god, finished the mission first try.
Okay, I'm going to apply that to art. You are very welcome. So you talked about how you took a break from the game and then came back to it, and then it worked out suddenly. And I watched this video by Izzy on YouTube, and she also did kind of talk a little bit about taking a break from art sometimes instead of constantly going and going and going, which is why you will sometimes see me like leave a piece on the side for a few days and then come back to paint it later. So it's not just with video games, the idea of taking breaks to kind of refresh your mind, refresh your eyes, cleanse your eyes, it applies to art as well.
But it's also good not to get burnt out. If you do a task, focus on it for 2 or 3 hours, for days at a time, you just get annoyed at it. You should, if you're an artist, you should do art for fun, for pleasure, because you enjoy it. Unless, it's a career or something like that. I don't know about that. Just take a break if you need to. Best advice, mental health, whatever, just take a break.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, we are kind of talking about why do people stop creating art? And um, it's not like this podcast is not to say like go make art, you have to make art. Breaks are also very important. So thank you for highlighting that. Um, I'm going to add another topic to the discussion as to why artists, not artists, but adults stop creating as they grow. Capitalism. Yes, please don't make a joke. Um, because this is supposed to be a serious podcast. So,
That's the type of person I am, though. Lighthearted. Anyways, back to point.
yes, so the point of capitalism, I watched this video on TikTok, I think, and the person was kind of talking about how we are expected to make a profit out of everything that we do. And if we are not making a profit, if we are not making money out of it, then it's a waste of time. So think about going to school. In the long run, you are expected to find a job and kind of make a profit in
You know,
from that, right?
yeah.
And
Raise a family, live the American dream, buy cars, live in a white fence suburban house with a boat, it's just trying to live the American dream.
yeah, I suppose. And it's just, I think art is one of those activities that's just, unless it's profitable, why are you wasting your time on it? And like, if you tell somebody you're drawing, immediately their reaction is, "Oh, can I see? Are you good at drawing? Can you draw me?" Right? Things like that. And I think it kind of poses this expectation on you that you have to be good to draw.
I would agree with that. It's also a point of, if, let's say, I'm a student, why should I draw when I can do math or read my science textbook or whatever?
Like, do something that is beneficial for your future type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even me as an artist, like I think I kind of relate to that because I do like I'm part of a program that's not art related. It's more like in the sciences and math related stuff. And so even me like during school, you know it, I don't really draw as much. So it's I think it's a very common experience whether you're an artist or not to, focus more on things like your studies or your work. And I think this kind of bleeds into just like not having time as an adult.
Yeah, I would also say, if you just, you know, I don't know, had a child or something like that, you're much more, for like those first 7 years, you're gonna be up at 3 a.m., like you're just not gonna be able to have the free time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a different level of expectation, like responsibilities, I mean, between, say, a teenager versus an adult. But at the same time, I'm going to play like devil's advocate. Why is it so hard to just sit down and color in a coloring book for 5 minutes as you're watching TV or like in lunch break?
I don't know, I
Is
would
that just
say,
something we don't
during
find
lunch,
worthy
for
of
me as a
doing
student,
or worthy
I
of
would
spending
rather
our
go
time, or is
outside,
it the
talk with my
materials
friends,
that's
and eat than sit at a
restricting?
desk alone and just draw. I'm not saying all artists are lonely, don't get me wrong, don't take that out of context, but like, you would rather spend time socializing. Human beings are very social animals. I mean, that's the reason why, women, when they're pregnant, their bellies get bigger, is to be able to socialize with other women who are also experiencing the same thing. I mean, look at buffaloes. They hide their pregnancy as much as they can because they don't want to appear weak to wolves.
I didn't understand that point, but yes, yes, definitely.
Like, what I'm trying to say is that humans are social animals. We rather than draw on a desk, sitting by yourself or with a bunch of other people who are also drawing, you would rather communicate.
Isn't that a 9 to 5 job?
I mean, touche.
So, in a sense, adults are already doing the things that you've described, except it's just not called art. It's called a profitable, quote unquote,
Yes.
profitable job. Um, So, yeah, I don't know, I think capitalism really does play a big role in this, where the expectation is that you make art or like you make something that will add value to your life, but the value has to be monetary. Like, it can't be satisfactory to you spiritually or emotionally. It has to almost always be something that gives you money, which is unfortunate.
I mean, if you look at artists of the past, whether it be authors, you know,
Painters,
painters,
sculptors.
sculptors, yes, whatever, many of them, there were some like Leonardo da Vinci, who created great sculptures, but if you look at his journal, it was full of ideas that weren't, ever created.
Hmm.
They were just that ideas. I mean, he literally had a tank drawing.
Hmm.
Of course, it wouldn't have worked, but still. Or you look at poems, these poems get, released like 150 years after the author dies.
Hmm.
They didn't do it just for profit. They did it because they just could. They had the time on their hands, They like that's something people in the 21st century will never get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I think in the 21st century, it's always a go, go, go mentality. It's always a, you know, like even for me, when I have school, my day-to-day life consists of home, school, home, school, home, school, and like the transit time alone is like 2 hours, right? And so I think, yeah, you're right. In the 21st century, a lot of us are in this like go, 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 do something, do something, do something mentality. And there's also more responsibilities that's kind of piled on our shoulders compared to maybe back then. But I don't know what the lifestyle was back then, so I'm just like pulling this out of.
Out of thin air. Well, I would say that back then people had much simpler lives. Of course, it wasn't easier per se, but it was,
But like less responsibilities, maybe.
yeah, less responsibility. All you had to do was put food on the table, whatever you did, whether you were a merchant, chef, baker,
Yeah, it's
whatever.
kind of like how moms in today's society are usually expected. Well, I don't want to say expected, but it's almost like to feed the family, right? To kind of keep up with the uh, rising prices of everything. Like moms with children are working, right? And then they come home. This is like for a standard family, though. And then they come home, they cook, wash the dishes, do the cleaning. Um, look after the children and then run after the children. If they're school age, go after the children. And like even a father, like a father figure would also like not only work but come home and hopefully help out with the chores and do chores and do a bit of cooking, cleaning, dishes and things like that, right? And yeah, you're right, it's just the lack of time, man.
There's also something called inflation. If you look, back in the 40s, you could buy a house for $1,100. Of course, the average weekly salary was around $100, but now working on minimum wage, $15 per hour, you can't even buy an apartment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I watched this video where they were talking about how back then you could get a job with a high school diploma pretty much. And a high school diploma is pretty much, when do you graduate? Like 18 probably, 17, 18, around that age group. And so thinking about getting a job, a decent like 9 to 5 well-paying job with insurance at that age versus having to graduate university and then still that degree not being enough to find a job, that's also quite, yeah, you're right.
People back then used the labor force, as a way to protect themselves and get themselves right. Blah, blah, blah. However, when they grew up and they themselves became business owners, they got rid of the uh, unions, and so pretty much the workers had nobody to represent them. And so that's why, America can get away with $11 or $10 per hour as minimum wage.
Which is very unrealistic. And like, if you are struggling to make ends meet, then yeah, how can we expect you to just spend time making art when probably you are working 2 jobs maybe or even 3? Like I know some people that have mentioned like in online settings like how they work 3 jobs just to feed their families, right? And the healthcare by itself, like when you have things like this going on for you, then yeah, it must be very difficult to find time for yourself, let alone find time for a creative outlet.
Not to mention, let's say it's, the parents of a child that are working 3 jobs, then this kid doesn't get any positive feedback. I mean, by the time the parents come back home, they're zombies from working all
Mm.
day.
So it's kind of like they might, the parents might be so tired that they might not have time to properly encourage the child's artistic interests.
Yeah, and, why do something that you're not gonna get praised on?
Mm. Yeah, as a child, you tend to um, put the value of everything that you do based off of the reaction of others because you don't really have a good sense of like you can't just look at an art and be like an art piece and be like, oh, this is good, this is bad, because you don't really have that type of skill developed yet, if that makes sense. And so, but you can tell what's good versus what's bad from the reaction of your parents, right? Or like the encouragement of your parents.
The best way to compare it is kind of like an animal. They listen to the tone of how a person talks to them to determine if they're doing something good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that got very deep. I think I'm going to try to end this podcast in a bit more of a lighter, well, not really a lighter tone, but on a bit of a different point. So we talked about having no time. We talked about capitalism. We talked about feeling like you have no talent, sometimes even no patience. So now let's talk about no materials, right? Like there's this misconception, even in the art community, right? Like with beginner artists, that you have to have these expensive art supplies. You have to have the best of the best to make art. What do you think?
Honestly, if you have a pencil, paper, free time, just go for it.
Agreed. Yes, definitely. Like art supplies will, like, I will agree, art supplies will make the process of creating easier, right? Or difficult. That I agree with. I have experienced that. But I personally don't have the most expensive supplies. Granted, like I am privileged in the sense that I can afford art supplies that are slightly more pricier, but you don't really need super expensive art supplies to create, especially if you're not doing it professionally. You can just doodle with a pencil and paper, just like my brother said.
I mean, if you're just doodling, don't expect to be Van Gogh or I don't know, don't expect to draw the Mona Lisa out of thin air. As we've mentioned, you need to practice a lot. You need to have the time to put in the skills.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, it's just like he said, not have as big of an expectation on yourself, especially if you're going to do this for fun. And I think that's what it is. Art is fun. It's meant to be fun. And I think putting a lot of pressure on yourself, thinking that you either have no talent or, um, whatever you do is just not going to be like the people on Instagram, like my younger brother pointed it out, then that just kind of defeats the whole purpose because art is meant to be fun. It's not meant to be a competition.
I have a question. How long have you been drawing for?
Well, I mean, obviously, just like you, I have been drawing since I was a child, right? Like as a child, you draw, you find a pencil, a paper, you just scribble. You scribble on walls, right? Because you don't know what's good, what's bad. You just scribble. Um, but I think what was helpful was that I didn't stop creating. Um, like in Turkey, we had art classes, right? And like everybody took these art classes. Everybody had to. Even though we didn't learn anything, we didn't learn any techniques, it was just a good time for you to just draw. And then when I came to Canada, it was more of a I'm lonely, I'm gonna draw type of situation, right? And for you, you've had your video games, which I think could be by some considered a creative outlet.
Oh, I feel like video games are definitely more artistic depending on the game. Of course, you can't just have a game like Doom that's all about, killing demons and be like, oh, this is art. But there's some games like Five Nights at Freddy's, for example, that have very deep and complex lore into it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And just like art itself, like games could potentially develop problem solving skills, right? I know there's a bit of a controversy around like children playing video games, and I'm not here to comment on that. Each parent, each child to their own, but there could be potentially some similarities between art and video games in terms of like problem solving and making quote unquote impulse decisions. Like impulse decisions meaning something goes wrong, think fast, right?
FPS games, first person shooters, they are it's actually been proven to have to give better reflexes and better time judgment skills because when a person is in front of you, whether they're a teammate or an enemy, your first thing is to look at, I don't know, the color above their username or what their clothes are.
Mhm. Like looking at visual cues to kind of identify your next action.
Whether that be, I don't know, pressing le the right click, left click, I don't know, whatever.
A type of click, yes.
Or just ignoring them.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Although I don't agree with like spending 5 hours a day gaming. Not that you're doing that, but
Of
like
course, you shouldn't. It should, as scientists have said, 2 hours maximum healthiest.
mhm. And I mean, I think that goes with art too. Like, it goes back to our discussion about taking breaks. You probably shouldn't, sit down and draw for 5 hours straight without moving. Like, get up, stretch a little. Otherwise, you're going to have carpal tunnel syndrome.
Speaking from experience.
Leave me alone.
But yeah, you should. I mean, don't hold a pencil in a death grip for 5 hours. Drop the pencil, take a walk, walk your animal, whether it be a cat or a dog, or maybe even your fish.
How do you walk a fish? I mean, I was going to say you can also bother your brother by like going into his room. That is always an option. Or like showing him some memes. Or like it's usually the other way around. He usually shows me memes.
But of course, you're never on your phone to check them.
Okay, it's good to not use your phone a lot. Okay, technology minimum. That's what we should do.
Technology has allowed the Western world to be more developed. However, it's also, I feel as if it's also caused, lots of drawbacks. If you look, many new parents, they don't know what to do, so they just give YouTube Kids on an iPad and let their kids watch that.
Yeah, I think there's the lack of parent and child connection sometimes because of that, but also one may argue that by, back in the days, parents would work so much that like maybe they also didn't have like that much of a connection with their children, or like the society at that time, the expectations on children at that time were maybe slightly different. But yeah, technology is good and bad in the sense that you connect to people afar, but maybe you feel a bit too distant to the people close by. But I'm going to get back to the topic of art.
I wanted to say, but back in, I don't know, 40s, 50s, there would always be one parent at the house taking care of the child, unless it was a lower class family. I'm talking about the average middle class family. Whether it would be the dad or the mom, who knows?
And this is like usually, like not always the case.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I'm gonna bring this conversation back to the topic of art. And this is already going on for almost half an hour, so maybe we can start concluding. But yeah, art is for everybody. And by art, I don't mean just painting or drawing. It could also be writing. It could be photography, taking photos. It could be coloring in coloring books.
It could literally just be modifying your car.
Yeah, I mean, um, so it can be like art can be anything. We're talking about creative expression, and creative expression, I think, is an important element in everybody's life. And no matter what your skill level is, I think it is helpful if you are able to incorporate into your daily routine. Well, not daily, but I would say like in your life, maybe once a month, twice a month, once or twice a week, however often that you can. Because, I mean, um, when you engage in creative work like this, they have actually shown that it just makes you feel good because, like, with the pathways of your brain or something, it does something. And so it is scientifically proven that it makes you feel good. And, shouldn't teens and adults be creating more if you consider that element and you consider that usually teens and adults have fairly stressful lives? But at the same time, that stressful life could also be a barrier to creating art because they don't have the time. Any remarks? Anything you want to add?
Honestly, it's a double-edged sword. That's the best way to put it. You can spend all your time drawing art, but I don't want to sound like a mean person, but if you don't, if you spend all your time on it and you don't make any profit,
Yeah.
then what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the type of society that we live in. Like, I think um, this doesn't necessarily mean you're a mean person. It's just that you're trying to be more realistic by looking at the society that we live in. Well, that got depressing, man. Like I was trying to end it in a good way.
That's what happens when you talk with me.
Um, well, go make art.
Definitely.
Go, even if it's not like painting or drawing, even if it's just writing, go ahead, do it. If it's journaling, go ahead, do it.
I mean, you saw the beautiful, best drawing of a car you've ever seen that I had drew on my sister's last video.
Yeah, you drew a beautiful car. Um, But yeah, I hope that this kind of natural flow of conversation was helpful to kind of discuss some of the topics related to art. If you can think of any other reasons as to why adults stop creating as they grow, please feel free to share it with me in the comments. Next week, I will post about starting my new sketchbook, and I'll be painting its cover. Subscribe or hang around for a little while if you're interested in that.
One last thing. Nearly anything can be art as long as it's not a banana taped to a wall.
Um, The comments made by my brother are in no mean a reflection of my own thoughts
But I mean it.
and my beliefs. My brother is his own person. Thank you very much for watching and take care.